Hi everyone, Dassault Systèmes is pleased to welcome you to this SBTi suppliers webinar. We will share with you on sustainability, why it is important to commit on ESG and tackle climate change. So my name is Thierry Muller. I'm Sustainable Procurement Senior Manager at SBTi. So following many meetings with our suppliers, we have noticed that it could be useful to demystify SBTi, to support you and to provide you some advice. So we hope that you will enjoy this webinar on the pragmatic perspectives shared with our partner EcoAct. Olivier Gauvin, Dassault Systèmes Chief Procurement Officer, Daniel Soares, Senior Consultant on Climate Strategy at EcoAct, and myself will answer to your question at the end of the webinar, which should last 45 minutes. You can send us your questions via the chat. So let's start. Awareness on climate change has significantly increased for 2 years. Everyone has in mind now that 100% of global warming is due to human activities, but it's never useless to remind it. And keep in mind the IPCC in French JEC synthesized 40,000 scientific papers on the current state of the climate and on the consequences of its evolution. And we have already reached 1°C compared to the pre-industrial climate. And so, consequences may be huge and dramatic. According to the IPCC in 2000, in the business as usual scenario, different regions will experience deadly humidity and hot weather conditions. Regions of Central America, Amazonia, Central Africa, Southern Asia, and Northern Australia will be unlivable more than 250 days per year. So this single factor could lead to 1 billion climate refugees. So everybody is aware of the urgency. And if we want to avoid these catastrophic impacts, we need to limit the global warming under 2 degrees. And every 10th of degree is important because impacts are so huge. Depends on trend on this graphic. Impacts will be really different on biodiversity, natural habitats for insects, plants, vertebrates, loss of coral reefs, sea level, annual fishing catch. Again, every 10th of degree is important, so every action is important. And to keep a trend under 2 degrees, CO2 emissions or GHG emissions must halve by 2030 and reduce to net zero by 2050. So you will understand that our climate, we are ambitious and active on this issue, and we all have a role to play in the transition to a zero carbon world. So, tackling climate change, what does that mean for Dassault Systèmes or for your company? We are aware that our whole ecosystem must be sustainable. We are convinced that everyone must work on progress on ESG, environmental, social, and governance topic. In 2022, it's a truism to explain that human rights, working conditions, prohibition of discrimination are key. Ethics is also key and is in our DNA. And environment, if you focus on planet boundaries, we know that there are many other issues to take into account: biodiversity, scarcity of resources, and so on. But the purpose of this presentation is to share with you on climate change, on climate urgency, and CO2 emissions. That is why, from our perspective, being a responsible company, that means to be committed on sustainability, environmental, social, and governance, and assessing its carbon footprint emissions on scope 1, 2, and 3, and truly understand where are its main impacts. Being a responsible company is having a credible and robust carbon footprint reduction trajectory. It's being mobilized to reach its target with action plans and public commitments. And at the end, yeah, it's adhere to SBTi. Researching is to start the sustainable journey wherever you are. Importance is a trend. And as we are aware that everybody here has not the same level of knowledge on CO2, let's spend a few minutes on the basic of carbon footprint. What are carbon emissions for a company? So, rules on CO2 emissions have been mainly defined by the GHG protocol. Greenhouse gas protocol is the most internally recognized framework for carbon accounting. It was developed by the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's required for setting a science-based target. It classifies company CO2 emissions in 3 scopes. So, in a company, to go in detail in a few minutes, CO2 emissions are split in 3 scopes. Scope 1, as you see on the script, it's the direct emissions from fixed or mobile installations located within the organizational perimeter. It's fuel consumption, content for who owns the fuel when it burns, gas pump on cars. In building, fuel for fireplace, furnace, gas meter, or cooking. And if you electrify everything in scope 1, you will reduce your scope 1 to 0. Scope 2 are indirect emissions associated with the production of electricity, heat or steam imported for the company's activities. To make it simple, it is electricity used and counted where it is consumed. If you change your grid mix to renewable power, you will reduce your scope 2 emissions. And scope 3 are other emissions indirectly generated by the company's activities that are not accounting for in scope 2, but are linked to the entire value chain. To make it simple, scope 3 is everything else than electricity and fuel consumption on the scope 1. So scope 3 depends a lot of what kind of business you are in, but at the end, usually scope 3 is 80% of a company emission, usually. So in scope 3, you have upstream and downstream emissions, but we will not go into details in this presentation. I just wanted to explain to you in a few minutes what are the CO2 emissions of a company measured with the GHG protocol. And so now we are going to explain why Dassault Systèmes has chosen SBTi to encompass its journey on carbon footprint reduction. So, Science-Based Target Initiative, or the SBTi, as it is often referred to, is an initiative that was founded back in 2015, just before the Paris Agreement, as a collaboration between 4 founding partner organizations, CDP, World Resources Institute, WWF, and United Nations Global Compact. These 4 non-governmental organizations came together to form the initiative to drive ambitious corporate climate action by enabling companies to set emissions reduction targets, which are based on latest climate science and are consistent with the goal of the Paris Agreement. So SBTi promotes the adoption of carbon strategies aligned with scientific knowledge, targeting a level of decarbonization compatible with keeping the rise in global average temperature below 1.5 to 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. So we know there are many initiatives on ESG and sustainability, but Dassault Systèmes supports SBTi and feels that is the most credible coalition to demonstrate that your organization has ambitious commitments on tackling climate crisis and reducing its own impact on the planet. Over the past few years, science-based targets have really emerged then as a gold standard when it comes to corporate climate target setting. And joining SBTi has many advantages. Of course, you demonstrate concrete sustainability commitments. But with SBTi, you will get an accreditation by a third party. And it provides stakeholder assurance that a target is aligned with required decarbonization pathway. You will increase your brand reputation. You will demonstrate leadership. With SBTi, you will clearly and publicly display your decarbonization ambition. And we know that public carbon targets are increasingly a KPI of suppliers and customer requirements. So you will increase your attractiveness, you will build credibility and reputation. An SBTi commitment ensures that you tackle climate change. And so you will increase your business resilience, your credibility on this topic. An example, in North America, in November 2022, the US administration proposed that the major federal contractors are required to publicly disclose their greenhouse gas emissions and set science-based emissions reductions targets. So if we reformulate, it may be soon mandatory in USA for major co-contractors who work with US administration to disclose their GHG emissions. So in 2 steps, they will be required to assess their GHG emissions and define emission targets based on science-based target initiative methodology. So consequently, you will not be surprised that the initiative is growing very quickly with an exponential growth, particularly these 2 past years to 18 months. And during 2022, there were over 1,800 companies which joined this initiative. There are now over 4,000 companies in this initiative. And we have a majority, so the majority of major companies have joined SBTi, but also many SMEs. So after sharing with you with SBTi, I'm going to let the floor to Olivier Gauvin, our 3DS Chief Procurement Officer, which will detail our commitments.
So hi everyone, and thanks Thierry. So I hope this explanation, this introduction by Thierry were clear to you all, and that you learn things about really environment and social and governance. Before obviously entering into the details, I wanted really to come back on just on Dassault Systèmes, because we know that some of our suppliers don't know Dassault Systèmes. So what does that Dassault Systèmes do? You know all certainly that today all aircraft, all cars are designed and simulated by our softwares, nearly all, for nearly all the brands. But we are also diversifying to 2 domains. One domain is the cities, where we are trying to digitalize the cities for, I would say, people to live better in the cities in terms of transport, in terms of housing, etc. And we are also digitalizing the body and doing digital twins for the human body. And I can tell you that there are a lot of applications of that in terms of medical, I would say, research. So this is Dassault Systèmes today, and it's important that our suppliers know that. So we put some figures here. So we are 22,000 people. You see 5 billion euro revenue, and we are a scientist company. And it's important for us because we are a software company, but our people and our R&D people are really scientists working, I told you, on medical stuff, on designing products and simulating products. And this is really the art of Dassault Systèmes. And in the art of the system, we have also the environment, the social and the governance. So today we'll speak a lot about environment, but social is really also important for us. And all about the governance is too, but it would be certainly discussed in other webinar. So if you are going to the next slide. So I told you here that Dassault Systèmes is really using imagine sustainable innovation capable of harmonizing product, nature, and life. And we are doing it for our clients, trying to help us design sustainable products. We are trying and doing our best, to be exemplary also for our own footprint. And we'll detail a little bit our targets, but we have ambitious targets for us. So we'll see that we'll have also ambitious targets for you because we need you and we need your help, to be able to achieve our targets in terms of environment. So we detail a little bit in the next slide. What's the next slide? The targets we have. So what we have done in Dassault Systèmes is that we decided in 2019 to engage with SBTi. And in 2021, we defined really targets. So more or less 1 year and a half after. And the targets we defined are, I would say, in three main topics. One, we say we want 52% of our suppliers to have a science-based target in 2025. And this is really where we need your help to engage into it because this will mean that our ecosystem will be, I would say, exemplary and will work and will put action, on the environment. Two, and now you know what is scope 1, 2, and 3. We have committed, to decrease our emission in scope 1 and 2 by 34% and 23% for the scope 3. This is ambitious, so this means that we are working on it. It's not easy. We have to understand, to work on it, but we are managing, and we feel that we'll be able to reach these targets for the scope 1, 2, and 3. And as an example, for example, for company cars, this is scope 1. We are having a plan, to transition to electrical vehicles, in our main countries. For example, in scope 2, we are buying green energy and thinking about purchasing a PPA, in the future. For scope 3, scope 3, more or less, it's our purchase, it's travel and employee commuting. So there's a lot of initiatives around travel, trying to travel less with fewer attendees, use train against air, use direct flight when sometimes we are doing some round trips, to load the cost. So a lot of, I would say, actions we are putting in place, to achieve, with 20% of decrease of the scope 3. But the main message on this slide is we need you for the goal in 2025 to adhere to SBTi for these 52% of suppliers having a science-based target. And clearly, we won't be able, to do it without our help. And just to finish, so this is a roadmap and the journey we'll do with you, with the aim in 2040 to be really carbon neutral in Dassault Systèmes. So if you are going to the next slide to close, I would say that from now, and certainly you had already discussion, with your sourcing category managers and the buyers in Dassault Systèmes. SBTi commitment is now a major criteria, to select our suppliers. So this is why we are doing this webinar, really to for you to be aware and to also for you to learn and to be aware that this is becoming really important for the system and really a main criteria when choosing our suppliers. And more than that, what we want to do is now that, this topic of environment will become a topic in each one of the discussion or business review that we'll have together to discuss about it, to see what we can do, together to improve our footprint, to improve, our way to purchase and to work together in terms of environment. So this is more or less what I wanted to do. So take it seriously and help us, to succeed into that. In this webinar, I wanted this webinar to be educational, but also practical. So that's why I will let the floor to Daniel. Daniel is a person from EcoAct. EcoAct is our partner to manage, I would say, these topics. And he will explain you in a pragmatic way how to adhere and what is the steps, to adhere to SBTi. And certainly it would be help for you to demystify, all that.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Olivier. Thierry, if you can go to the next slide and also activate the share for all the hosts.
I think now you can. Can you share your screen now, Daniel?
Yeah, it works now. So you probably can see my screen now.
I'm going to stop. I think now it's up to you.
Okay. So normally you can see it. And then, yes, as Olivier was saying, so hello everyone, I'm Daniel. I'm a senior consultant on climate strategy for the consultant company called EcoAct. EcoAct, we're based in Paris, in France, but we have offices all around the world, but mostly in Europe and North America. We have two business lines. The main one is climate advisory. So as Thierry Olivier told you about, carbon footprint, science-based targets, but also risk assessment, CDP reporting, and more general projects. We also have a step on offset projects. Some companies wish to offset a part of the emissions, of course, after reducing it. We can also accompany them on this part. So just to say who we are, but we're not here to talk about the EcoAct, but mostly about the SBT. So I think now you understand the idea and the interest of the science-based targets. It can help you first understand your emissions and then communicate with your clients, partners, and suppliers. But in reality, what is a science-based target? So let's start with the word target. So a target starts with a time frame. When is the base year? When is the target year? For example, you can say, I will make some reductions on my emissions from a 2020 baseline until 2030, or until 2040, or until 2050. So the first step is saying, what's the time frame? When is the reference? When is the target? And then you have to define a perimeter. What's the scope? So he explained you the difference between scope 1 and 2, that's your direct operation emissions, your car, your buildings, and then the scope 3, or your supply chain. So first you have to decide what's the scope covered by this target. Is it everything? Is it one part of scope 1 and 2 and then one part of scope 3? Is only your operations on sold products? So this is what we call a perimeter. So once you have a time frame, a scope, you have to define a methodology. We go over details, what are the methodologies the SBT accepts, but you can think of first, the most basic one is an absolute approach. You say that you reduce your emissions by 10% of all your emissions. But you can also think on intensity. For example, you can reduce your emissions by X% per product sold, or per euro of turnover, or per, I don't know, cars, kilometers, kilowatt hours. So the methodology will help you to choose what's the best metric for this target. And then the last part is the ambition. Is it going to be a very ambitious target, like to reduce 90, 80% of our emissions, or a target that you only reduce 10 or 20%? You also have sector specific, but we're not going to talk about this. This, for example, if you work on logistics or energy production or steel production. So with the time frame, perimeter, methodology, and ambition, a target can be very generic. A science-based target is some criteria on this one. You cannot have any time frame or any perimeter or any methodology. And that's what the SBT will define. So as you understand, the first part, in reality, the most difficult part for most of our clients is the carbon footprint. It's having a good and reliable carbon footprint. This can be very simple, very hard, depending on your operations. If your operations are very simple, you can easily compute them. You have operations all over the world with many suppliers and many operations differently. It can be very complicated. So what we put here is some links to better understand what's a good carbon footprint and how can you compute it? Because the first step is having the data, collecting the data, and then using some methodologies to estimate the emissions. So here, Thierry will put the link so you can watch the videos and read the documents to have a better idea. And then, of course, for big companies like Dassault Systèmes or others, generally they will ask the assistance of a consulting firm, like EcoAct, to help with some details, maybe some computations on some hypothesis, some methodology. That's something you can do. But you also have software companies that have online tools. They are not free, but they are less expensive than a real consulting firm. And what you can do is use them. Of course, each one we list 3 here: Greenly, Global Climate Initiative, SWIP as an example. You have many others. You have to check what's most adapted to your business. Are you a small company, a big company, an industrial, international or national company? So these software tools are there to help you to make the computation easier. Okay, so once you have this carbon footprint, you need to understand what's the SBT. I'll just show and then I'll go back because I know that many of you are small companies. And for small companies, the SBTi made their life much easier with some simplifications. But before that, because if you're interested in submitting a science-based target, one thing you want to know is the science-based target website. One thing you can say, so go here, science-based targets on your browser, Google, etc. Here you have a company taking action, and you can already see all the companies that have a target. You can see what's the near term, long term, what's the ambition, and then what type of sector. For example, if it's a small company or a normal company, etc. So this can maybe help you. For example, let's just take the first one, and here you say what's the target. They say they will reduce scope 1 and 2 by 25% by 2030 from 2020. And that's what will be shown for everyone. And then what I want to show you is the resource part. The resource part has everything you need to know to set a target and to submit. So of course, we're not going to show everything, but know that if you want to go in details, you have everything here. Now come back to the presentation. So as I said, for small companies, you know that maybe you don't have the resources to have someone to compute a complete carbon footprint or spend time and resource to submit a complete science-based targets submission form. So that's why the SBTi created this streamlined path for a small and medium-sized enterprise. So first of all, the definition is a company that's non-subsidiary, independent, and fewer than 500 employees. And on part of the detail, it's what they call 500 headcount. So if you have, let's say, 600 part-time employees, that counts as 600 and not 300. So if you have less than 500 headcount, you can submit on the, and if you're an independent company, you can submit as a SME. And what do you need? So you need a scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint and targets. So again, scope 1 and 2 are all your direct emissions, your buildings, your cars, if you have some production lines, but you don't include your suppliers or your products. So once you have the scope 1 and 2, you have to cover almost all of it. In reality, you can have some exclusions, but no more than 5%. With this carbon footprint, you can choose a base year. So the base year will be your reference between 2018 and 2021. And of course, next year, you can also have 2022. But the target year must be 2030. This is to simplify and easily compare everyone. And again, the ambition for a SME, you don't have much choice. It's the baseline for everyone. And the baseline is 4.2% per year or 42 over 10 years. And just to explain this number, as Thierry explained before, this is aligned with the science. So the science tells if you want to stay under 1.5 degrees, all the companies must reduce to 42% over 10 years. So these are the 3 main elements: have a carbon footprint on direct emissions, select a base year. You have to, of course, engage, because this is not just some paper you're going to sign. You're going to engage with your partners. Once you have that, you can go to the website. So you have the link here, and you can also click, of course. but I prefer to show how can you go to this information directly. So if you go to resources and then submit, you have, if you search SME, here you go, set a target, and then you bring it to an online form. And what you have to do, so there's lots of information, you can go over detail. I forgot to tell about the price. The price is the time frame. So once you fill this form, it may take 1 to 2 weeks. The SBTi will answer, and if they validate your target, you have to pay $1,000 one time, and that's it. And the form, it's quite simple. Of course, you're not going to fill everything, but you have details on the company name, on the contact. They will ask how many employees you have, what are your emissions, what is a sector, and then what target do you choose. And at the end, you just have to sign, and that's it. And also this other document, if you want to go into details, they have all the questions for this type of company. So here you go, maybe have some questions at the end. You have a question, Q&A session, but the main points are there. So this for a small company. If you're not a small company, it's a little more complicated, but not that much. So the submission works in 5 steps. The first one is make a commitment. A commitment is to communicate with everyone that you are developing a target. So even before having developed the target, you can make a commitment. And on the website you show, your company will be shown as committed. And this is just a letter that you sign and send to the SBT. Once you send this letter, you have 2 years, 24 months to develop your target. So develop your target, you're going to see is choose methodology, choose the base year, choose the target year, make the calculations. And then you have to submit. Submit is a submission form similar to the one we just saw, but with much more information, of course, about your company, what are your business units, where are your operations, what is your reduction plan. So you have to fill out this detail. You send to the SBTi. It may take some months. They have lots of demands right now, so it can take from 3 to 6 months. Then at the end, again, you have to pay, and then you can communicate. But you also have to resubmit every 5 years. The idea is that everything will change, your company, your estimations, your methodology, the criteria. So every 5 years, you should resubmit. So these are the 5 steps. Commit, this takes maybe a few days. Develop, depends, can take a few days to a few months. Submission, this can take several months, depends on the SBTi. And then monitor every year. And I should add, you also engage to have a carbon footprint every year. This is also the case for the small company, but for this, just scope 1 and 2. So what are the methodologies you can choose? You can choose from. As we saw for small companies, it's only scope 1 and 2. So again, direct emissions from vehicles, operations, and buildings. Base year 2018 or later, target year 2030, and the reduction to what we call ACA, absolute contraction. It just doesn't matter what your emission, doesn't matter your sector, you have to reduce by this rate. The general case, you have 2 different criteria for scope 1 and 2 and 3. Scope 1 and 2 is quite similar, just some flexibility on the target year. It's 5 to 10 years from the submission year. So if I submit this year, 2022, I can choose a target from 2027 to 2032, sorry. That depends on the strategy, on your communication, on your action plan, of course. And you have some flexibility on defining renewable electricity targets instead of reduction. And also, if you are on a sector like transportation, steel, buildings, or power generation, you can have this sectorial guidance. I'm not going into details, but if you go to SBTi resource, you can find all the sector guidance. And then for scope 3, if your scope 3 is important, by important, they mean more than 40% of your total emissions, then you also have to have a target for a scope 3, and this target must cover 2/3 of scope 3. So again, if your scope 3 is a reasonable amount, you have to have a target, and this target must cover 2/3. So maybe you will include your suppliers, your transportation, but you exclude the community of your employees, for example. That's up to you. You can include everything, of course, but it's not mandatory. Similar for base year, target year. And then the intensity, you can have this, first, of course, I almost forgot. The ambition can be 1.5 degree. So again, it's the reduction necessary to keep a world with a global warming fewer than 1.5. But you can also have less ambitious targets because it's normal. Scope 1 and 2, it's your direct, so you have direct control. Scope 3, you have just an indirect control. So they understand that the ambition doesn't have to be the same. And then instead of 4.2, you can have 2.5 per year. So it's 25 in 10 years. And also you can have intensity target. So instead of reducing absolutely, reduce by car, by product, by euro, by employee. And the last one is supply engagement. For example, Dassault Systèmes, they can engage with their suppliers to educate and to engage them in setting targets, because that's important to keep in mind. Your emissions are the upstream emissions of Dassault, and the emissions of your suppliers are your upstream emissions, and everything is connected. That's why it's very important to engage with suppliers and with clients, of course. So here you have much more resources. As I said, the commitment letter for the general case. We still have a couple of minutes, so I'll just very quickly show the target setting tool. The target setting tool is just you put the numbers that you just discussed, and they will compute what's your target. So here you have two main windows, the SBT2 for scope 1 and 2, and for scope 3. I'll just show scope 1 and 2. So for example, let's say you use the absolute contraction approach. My base year is last year. Let's say I had 1,000 ton CO2, and I choose 2030 as a target year. So here up, we have base year, emissions, target year. This I'm not explaining right now, but you can have some difference between the base year and the most recent year. And then just under here, they say, okay, for these emissions, you should reduce 42%. But let's say that my target year was not 2030, but 2032. And then, okay, it's a little more, and you can see that the trajectory for scope 1 and 2. For scope 3, the same thing. Let's say it's an absolute contraction approach. Same base year, same target year, and they will compute with different emissions. So this is the base for your target, and you can use this data for your submission. So I think it's lots of information. I hope I was clear. Those data you have questions at the end, and then you share the slide. And now I leave the floor to Thierry and Olivier for the conclusion. Yes, sorry, we can't hear you. I think the mic is off.
Okay, I was off. Thanks. Thank you, Daniel, for this presentation. We wanted to be very pragmatic and go sometimes in details because it's important. So to sum up, joining SBTi, what does that mean? What is the effort? As it displays, the first step is really to assess your CO2 emissions and to understand the emissions caused by your company's operations. And then keep in mind, two paths depends if you are an SMEs or large companies. The fees are different. The cost for target validation process is $1,000 for SMEs and nearly $10,000 for large company. And I had a question in the chat. The fees are one-time fee. After the due diligence process by SBTi, you will receive an invoice on the signature of the general conditions of sales, and that is all. And then keep in mind, the price is not the same, and the journey, the effort is not the same. When you are an SME or large company, you need to understand your emissions, so you need to assess your scope 1, 2, and 3. Then, when you are an SME, you need to define targets only on scope 1 and 2. When you're a large company, you need to define also targets on scope 3. And this target is, of course, to be validated by SBTi. And then what is really important is driving your sustainability, your sustainable journey. We know it's a long journey to disclose your commitments, put in place concrete action, and share it with us. So it is now time for questions. So there was other questions. I'm going to come back. How do I know if I'm in scope 1, 2, and 3? So we have shared on methodology what is scope 1, 2, and 3. Usually our suppliers are in scope 3. For example, at Dassault Systèmes, okay, we have some company cars, and so the consumption of gasoline is measured in scope 1. But if we have services with our leaser, it will be accounting in scope 3. And Daniel, I think I have a question for you. If we come back to the way of calculating the emissions, so I read the question, how are the emissions calculated? Do we speak about overall emissions or average emissions per employee for capital? I think the question was on the baseline.
Yeah, so on two ways. So the computation first is always going from data to emissions. So for example, the most basic is spend data. You know how much you spend on transportation, how much you spend on services, and then you can convert using emission factors. These are either given by the software, either available online or in some database. You can also have some physical units, for example, how many computers you bought, how many kilometers you done. And then once you have these emissions, you can, when you publish them, you can publish absolute emissions, so all your emissions. And normally you also give some intensities. For example, your emissions by employees or by dollars of turnover, or even by products sold. Not sure if this answer your questions, but yeah, let me know if it's not clear. We can hear you, Thierry. Sorry.
Thanks again. Yeah. So I'm reading in the chat, so I'm expecting your answer was okay. Yeah. Another question. Okay, thank you. Daniel, can you read the question? Can you see the question about growth?
Yes. So, okay, the question about our growth, less than 10 employees in 2019 and now almost 50. Yeah, the emissions are a lot higher nowadays than 2019. So in this case, the best approach is, let's say you want to set a target right now. The best approach was, first of all, if you set it, let's say 2023, you have to consider 2022 or 2020. I'm sorry, if you're a small company, you can use 2018. So yes, the most appropriate will use the most recent data, because if you changed a lot, this might not be representative. So what I would recommend is use the most recent data, even though the SBTi could accept a more older data if they feel that you're re-engaged. But in general, they're much more, for a big company, they would not accept it because there was a big change. But in general, they are much more flexible for small companies. So if you can explain, for example, that you don't have a newer carbon footprint, they might accept it.
Yeah, and another question, which is, yeah, no, it's not the same question. Yeah, does it make sense for a company with a small carbon footprint or for a company already engaged on environmental topics to join SBTi? I will answer, it's critical for all our suppliers to join in, even those that might not have high emissions. Even if you do not have very high emissions in your direct operation, it could be that you actually just have higher emission in your scope 3. So indeed, and I think it's the importance of going through a process like SBTi is firstly as well to assess and truly understand your emissions across the entire value chain. And then you show that you are acting in line with the latest climate science. So I think it's really the ideal way to do on signality. And yeah, what's the timeline to expect us to access? I would say we know it's a long journey. You have two steps. Depends if you are an SME or large company. If you are an SME, you can submit and directly validate your targets with SBTi. If you're a large company, you need a first step to submit. Then you work on your targets, and then you have the steps which were explained in the previous slides. So I will say ASAP because as Olivier told us just before, from now on, and I would say for many months now, we have included SBTi requirements for our suppliers, which are significant and in CO2 emissions. And I would say if you have a significant spend with us, you will have significant CO2 emissions with us. And for us, it's really key. And for our new suppliers, it's mandatory. And for our current supplier, I think you need really to engage, because for us, it's important because as we have shared with you at the beginning of the presentation, we have publicly committed our SBTi targets. And really, we want to demonstrate that we tackle and that we drive our ecosystem to tackle climate change. And so the question, what does it need from us to prove we are committed on SBTi? For us, the easiest way to demonstrate it is to provide us the SBTi certificate. Usually, I have shared before this kind of webinar with many suppliers, and after some meetings, they send me an email and tell me, okay, we have joined SBTi. You can check it on the SBTi website. And we see sometimes you have the two levels of commitments, committed or target set. And so for us, it's the right demonstrations that, okay, you did the job. You are with us on this sustainable journey. Are there examples? Daniel, maybe you can write answer to the following questions. Are there examples of specific targets that are commonly committed by small business enterprise?
Yeah, right. Can you show an example? I'll check the screen again.
Yeah.
And if,
I think you can take it.
Yeah, now you're seeing it. And then if you just, and then let's see together. If you go to company take action, and then here I can filter on organization type. So small, medium enterprise. So for example, here we have first a message saying that they use the streamlined, and then
Daniel, I think we have an issue. I'm not sure that we can see your screen.
Okay. I'll go again. What about now?
I just want to test because. Okay, that's okay. Thanks.
That's like television. So here, if you go to the website, companies take action. So the website is science-based targets. Then filter on SME. We have, for example, most of them have the same formulation. Is this the company commits to reduce scope 1 and scope 2 emissions by the percentage depends on the target base year, and to measure and reduce its scope 3. So you see they engage to measure and to reduce, but they don't give a target on scope 3. Let's take another one. And they're quite similar. So commits to reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions by 38%, and to measure reduce its scope 3 emissions. One important thing I should add that we're talking about 42%. It's a new criteria since this year. So maybe you can have some other targets that are less ambitious. So probably today would be close to 42. But yeah. So the information is the same. What you change is the ambition. And this during the form you can choose one of these ambitions.
But what we can share is usually it depends, of course, on the profile of your company. But usually on scope 2, which is mainly generated by consumption of electricity, the actions are to reduce your consumption and then to use renewable energy. for example. That's a kind of action that you can put in place, and you will make savings. Yeah. I'm checking the questions. I think we have answered to the question. Yeah. Yeah, and last question, yeah, you showed just before near-term targets and long-term targets. What is the difference between near-term and long-term? So near-term targets outline how organizations will reduce their emissions over the next 5 or 10 years. That is our expectations. Then long-term targets, which SBTi, means that you commit to net zero no later than 2050. So ambition is higher, and we appreciate it, of course. But our expectation is near-term targets. Okay, so I think, yeah, I'm a company under, yeah. Is this one time or yeah? Yeah, so, yeah, when you submit to SBTi, it's a one-time fee. Well, if you are a company under 500 employees or higher than 500 employees, it's a one-time fee. Then, and Daniel, you will, I think you confirm, usually we need to redefine our targets every 5 years. But I think during 5 years, you do not need to repay any fee. It's really one-time fee.
Yeah, that's correct. For a small company, you pay 1,000 now. Of course, if you want to change your target, or if you're no longer a small company, you can always do it before. But normally, it would be in 5 years, and then in 5 years you pay $1,000 again. And for general case for bigger companies, I don't have mine, but I think it's 9,500 the first time, and the second time it's less expensive, but I'm not sure about the value. But yet at least every 5 years you would pay.
Okay, so I think if we have no other question, I'm going to thank everybody for attending this session. Thank you, Daniel, for this support on your presentation. Feel free to send me, if you need any support, feel free to send me an email. We will share this presentation in the next days. Okay, so thank you for everybody, and have a nice day or evening. It depends where you are. Bye bye.